Thank you all for coming. So welcome to SIMBA Chain's webinar presented today in concert with the Chronicle of Higher Education, titled Social Cyber, Blockchain and Research in the Social Sciences. So blockchain has been in the news a lot lately due to the skyrocketing prices of cryptocurrencies and explosion of non-fungible tokens, or NFTs as they're otherwise known. While all of these digital assets are based on an underlying blockchain technology, they are far from its only applications. Blockchain technology has the potential to transform many sectors and disciplines, including the social sciences. Of particular interest to those in higher education is the impact on research. So, given these trends, how can the higher education community prepare students and researchers for this brave new world? Well, today we'll be covering blockchain in the social sciences, and we're very privileged to be joined by Dr. Zack Rogers, Senior Research Lead at the Jeff Bleich Center for the U.S. Alliance in Digital Technology, Security, and Governance at Flinders University in Australia. Zack will be talking about this concept of social cyber, and it's a very interesting concept you're going to enjoy. We'd like you to contribute today, too, during our time together. So now and throughout the webinar, you'll be able to use the Zoom Q&A function to ask questions, which we'll get towards the end of the webinar. We'll try to answer as many of these questions as possible during the webinar, but most of them we're probably going to get to at the end. So please be patient. We will also be sharing a recording of this webinar with you all tomorrow, including a link to the slides that we present today. So we hope you enjoy the presentation, and we hope you learn a few things, and we hope you teach us a few things as well. So with that, let's get right into it. Social cyber and blockchain. So why are we putting these concepts together? Well, it may be helpful to start with a quick introduction. Myself, I'm Anshin Roy with SIMBA Chain. I'll be joined today with David Wasson, and of course, you know, Zack Rogers. So the topics we're going to be covering are, blockchain 101. We're going to start with a very, very high level explanation of what blockchain is. This is not meant for the technologists, it's meant for the generalists. Then we're going to talk a little bit about blockchain and its relevancy to the social sciences. Then I'm going to hand things over to my colleague David, and he's going to talk about research partnerships and a particular application. And then, of course, we're going to hand things over to our friend and colleague, Dr. Zack Rogers, and he's going to present his case study on this concept of social cyber. So first off, just a very quick blockchain primer. So for those of you who've been on our Chronicle webinars, this is going to be a little bit of review, so do bear with us. But for everybody else, we want to start by giving a level set understanding. If you have no idea what blockchain is, what is a way to start conceptualizing it and learn the basics in like 2 minutes? So first off, imagine that you've got a Google spreadsheet, okay? And everybody's seen these things, or hopefully most of you have. But this spreadsheet is one that we can all access, which most of us can. Okay, which is the typical of Google spreadsheets. Now, bear with me. Now, let's say we can only add additional lines to that spreadsheet. Okay, you can't go back and update. You can't erase. You can't, change things. You can only add additional lines, and that's a property of blockchain known as append only. That you'll see if you follow the industry and you research it. It's a kind of a baseline characteristic. Now, let's say that all of us, say the 3 of us on the webinar, all of you out there, we all own co-equal copies. Not like we have not Google owns a central copy that we all share. Not that I have a copy, like the master copy, and then the rest of you have a copy of the master copy. No. This is we have actual co-equal shares of this Google spreadsheet that we can all access and we can all only add lines to. So that's this concept of decentralization. That's also a core property of blockchain. Now, let's also say that we automatically stay in sync, okay? Which is important, right? If we're all going to own co-equal copies, we also have to have a shared, it has to say the same thing, right? It's kind of pointless if we're saying different things, because then it's not really the same spreadsheet, right? So the way we automatically stay in sync, that technology is called consensus algorithms. There's a whole lot behind it, but I think the bottom line with consensus algorithms that you hear about is that it keeps all of us in sync so that we all own the same co-equal copy that we can all only append to. Now, beyond that, let's just say that, before we, created this spreadsheet and decided how we were going to collaborate, our network predetermined what information is shared. So there may be things on this spreadsheet, several items, but there are some things that everybody can see that I share. There may be some things only some people can see, and which gets us to the next, the next requirement, property number 6. Our network predetermines what information is private, okay? So these two are kind of different sides to the same coin, because we decide upfront, okay, all of this will be transparent. These properties, we decide up front, these things will be private only to me. So for instance, if you follow cryptocurrencies, you follow Bitcoin, you'll know that what is transparent is that a transaction is happening, okay? That's transparent for the world to see. What is not transparent is who's doing those transactions, okay? Generally speaking, that is not transparent. You can see that it's happening, but unless if you give up, your key, or you make a particular thing public, who that is, the privacy of who's partaking in those transactions is private and cannot and can't be detected, at least not by normal means, by way the network functions. And then finally, this part is also interesting, and kind of adds an additional layer beyond what you might see in the earliest blockchains like Bitcoin and others, is that our co-equal copies can also include executable code, so that digital workflows are guaranteed to automatically execute. So think of it almost like as a very layperson explanation would be like these co-equal spreadsheets that we all co-equal copies of, that you can only write to, that stays in sync with each other, that is transparent in some stuff, but private in other things, depending on what we predetermined. They also include these Excel macros, okay? And the beauty is that these macros, we all co-own, okay? We all have so part of the consensus algorithms of keeping us all in sync also includes, and keeping a shared data also includes, this executable smart code that runs on the network, and that's what's called smart contracts. So if you put all that together, that's like a very imaginary, basic metaphor of what a blockchain is. So ultimately, what does a blockchain provide? And there's plenty of explanations out there, plenty of good explanations, plenty of not so good explanations as well that are out on the internet if you go research. But the one that I found that was kind of the simplest, that did it in one sentence and did it in a way that you didn't need any specialized knowledge to basically understand, is this one right here. Blockchain enables multiple parties, multiple separate entities to share a single version of the data, keep that data in sync between themselves, thus removing the need to reconcile, to message, to propagate, to sync, or to otherwise maintain versions of data that are co-owned by different parties to reflect one another accurately. So there's a lot going on there. But if you step back for a second, then ultimately, what is blockchain? What are some basic characteristics, or meta characteristics of blockchain if you had to describe it? Well, a lot of moving parts there. So I would say overall, it's abstract. It's not concrete in the traditional sense, because you're dealing with different types of technology, and your encryption and decentralized databases and consensus algorithms and the like. So it's abstract and it's complicated. It's also specialized. It requires some degree of specialized understanding to be able to operate with a higher with more depth. It's hyper collaborative and social, and I highlighted social for a reason, and is being utilized across disciplines and sectors. But let's focus on the hyper collaborative and social aspects, and why that's relevant to the social sciences. Blockchain allows modes of kind of collaboration, modes of people working together, and modes of us kind of solving problems together, that is different than traditional technologies, that is very different than the paradigms by which we have traditionally operated. And so that's a very relevant thing for the social sciences, because at the end of the day, the social sciences are about people, right? It's the humanities. I'm using social sciences and humanities interchangeably here. The humanities is literally what makes us human. And so if you're going to study people, and if your field of research or study is how people operate, how they organize themselves, then blockchain is very relevant to you. And your field is very relevant to blockchain, because it's such a hyper collaborative and social technology. And I'll leave you with this before we move on to David, and we'll start with a quote from Plato. I believe this is from the Republic, and you should not honor men more than the truth. And obviously he meant, we will take that in a gender neutral fashion for the 21st century. But blockchain, think of it as a trust and governance multiplier. And why is that? It is really for kind of three reasons. They're pretty interrelated. And one is that it's very easy to verify something and very hard to falsify with the use of blockchain, and especially so to do so at scale. Easy to verify, hard to falsify. Thus, that enables, modes of governance and collaboration on a shared truth that are both inputs and outputs. So what do I mean by that? That to really kind of realize the potential of blockchain technology, you need modes of collaboration, you need modes of governance, which are very relevant to the social sciences for blockchain to realize its kind of true potential. So it's important that the social sciences engage with this technology, and vice versa. The output of what you get out of true, mature blockchain applications and the potential that blockchain enables is new modes of collaboration and governance that didn't otherwise exist. So that's what we mean by it's both an input and an output. And finally, this idea of the single source of truth. I've got a couple colleagues, at my company, and we were just talking about this earlier, that, they use this term single source of truth because sometimes when we're all collaborating and like any organization, we're trying to be on the same page. Let's at least start with like a single version of what everybody is working on. And so being able to do this at scale is a tremendous potential of what blockchain offers, because you have this single kind of, what do you want to call it, a lingua franca, a translation layer, a single source of the truth, whatever it is. And this is really important to the social sciences because ultimately it comes back to trust and governance. So I'll leave you with that quote from Plato again: "You should not honor people more than the truth." There was a modification in there. And I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, David. So David, would you like to take over?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thank you, Anjan, for that. And good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts and some words about the collaboration that SIMBA Chain and JBC Flinders. And let me share my screen, I'm sorry. So yeah, I just wanted to put a framework around the relationship between Flinders and JBC and SIMBA. So I mean, really, what this is, it's a story of. Let me get through this. I'm so sorry about this. It's really a story about government and academia, government, and technology all working in concert with each other to really make a positive impact on society. And that's exactly what happened with the collaboration that we had with JBC Flinders. And essentially, our relationship with JBC Flinders started with us exploring opportunities to collaborate around education, using blockchain in the education for students and also in research. At that time, JBC, and I think for some time, actually has had a relationship with the Australian government, specifically the Australian Defence Force. And at that time, JBC and ADF, Australian Defence Force, we're exploring solutions around potential disinformation and misinformation of government released media assets. So that's basically how the JBC and ADF SIMBA relationship happened. And SIMBA's chain got involved obviously because of our expertise in blockchain, but also because of our experience working with the US government. So I'm just gonna give a quick brief on the technology really at a high level. It's a blockchain-based mobile app that is used to authenticate official released media assets from the government. So the original content is stored on blockchain, which uses military-grade encryption to secure that. And that data that's stored there is media assets, including video, images, audio, text. And essentially what would happen is what happens is the suspected media, if there's any media out there that's suspected has been manipulated, it would be compared to that secured information on the blockchain. What's really brilliant about the technology, it wasn't just comparing that either it matched or didn't match, it was actually categorizing or indicating the degree of mismatch, or how much changes have been made to that, either that image or that video. And then kind of the last part of that was more the human part of it, was based on that data, you would have a human that would need to interpret that data to kind of rate the level of intent of maliciousness. And actually we've coined the phrase trust officer, and Zach's going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But what I think is also interesting is this is a an example of government and academia and private sector technology working together, where we actually created this technology for a specific purpose. SIMBA then went away, and we've actually put a generic version of that technology together and commercialized it. And it's currently being trialed and tested by the United States Marine Corps. It's the United States Air Force have committed to testing it this year. And we also have private sector that's expressed interest in pursuing this technology. So I wanted to just say a couple things about Zack. So Zack Rogers and I have known each other for over a year now. He as Anjan said, some of his credentials, but he also is currently involved in some emerging fields of research, such as social cybersecurity, digital anthropology, and democratic resilience. Like I said, I've had the pleasure of working with him for the last year and a half on this project, and I'd like to introduce him now. So Zack, my pleasure.
Thanks so much, David and Anjan. I'll get to sharing my screen now. I hope everybody can see that okay. Hi, everyone out there. Let me first just say it's a real pleasure to be invited to this webinar with the Chronicle and with SIMBA Chain. I hope people find this useful, and I really look forward to any approaches or questions, and also potential collaborations later down the track. My plan over the next 20 or 25 minutes or so is to just give you a little bit of a snapshot of what we do here at the JBC at Flinders in Adelaide, South Australia. Talk to some of the themes that David and Anjan mentioned. And then I really want to circle all the way back to the fantastic little collaboration that I was involved in with SIMBA and the Australian government, as David mentioned, over the last year or so. So I think it just sort of captures quite a bit of what's been said already, and also grabs that theme of collaboration. And it's just a really neat little example of industry, government and academia coming together, a small group of people forming really good relationships, even though they were almost all remote, and actually getting to a problem set and producing a really innovative and interesting new technology application that I think has been fantastic to see SIMBA commercialize that. And when I get to explaining a bit about that, I can bring you up to date of where it is with the Australian government. But I think it's a sleeping giant, to tell you the truth. I really believe that the Media Verify application and what it does and what it means can be expanded across government. It can be expanded into industry and enterprise, and even at the individual and community level. I think it has the potential to be a real game changer in terms of what we're facing with the information environment as open democratic societies. So I'll try to circle back to that, but I'll first just give you a bit of a snapshot of social cyber and some of the themes that we are looking at here at the JBC. We've wrapped this term social cyber around a bunch of themes because we just think the time has come to finally put to bed the idea that cyber and all things digital technologies are inherently things that technologists should be talking about, and are inherently technology issues and technology problems and technology solutions. We're very much of the view that because digital technology and cyberspace now increasingly mediate so much of our information environment and our information diets, that it really belongs in the realm of the social and the political. The reason for that is, societies do exist inherently in types of informational conditions. We refer to it as information as an environmental condition in which our society exists in. And now that the digital technologies and cyberspace mediate so much of that environment, if you like, cyberspace determines what we see and what we don't see. Cyberspace determines how much of it we see, when we see it, in what sort of structure it's flowing towards us and away from us. That it really belongs, the technology really belongs in a broader, expanded paradigm, if you like. Traditional cybersecurity and cyber affairs are still treated as highly technical. They're still thought of as largely in terms of computer network security. The language of the cybersecurity industry is intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, penetration testing, whitelisting, malware, ransomware, advanced persistent threats. These are very highly technical, very much technology-focused language and paradigms that the cybersecurity industry still exists in. And then there's this emerging discourse on the implications and effects of all of this mediation by digital computational machines of everything we do now, from all of the resource allocation infrastructures that human beings have to interact with to get the things they need in society, whether it be insurance, banking and credit, law enforcement, housing, education, healthcare. Everything is increasingly mediated by a digital ecosystem, and which has grown up and has really over the last 20 years reflected a massive expansion of what is essentially a profiling and scoring industry. You can almost boil it down to that, but that's, some would say, unfortunately, where the digital age sort of went. We had a lot of optimistic ideas about the internet and about digital 20 or 30 years ago. And what it's largely expressed as over the last at least 15 years is this business model based around the expansion and buying and selling of profiles and scores of people, and the commercialization of those products and services, and the selling of them into a massive ecosystem of all of those industries and enterprises that I mentioned. And this is increasingly having major effects on our society, and it's certainly affecting that information environment, as I mentioned before. So social cyber is an attempt to really just wrap a label around a need to expand cyber and digital out from the purely technical into the social, political, and economic. As a label, I think it's sort of working. People are kind of understanding what we mean when we bring that big label social cyber forward. We've got a lot of, had a lot of good feedback from industry and government, not only working with SIMBA, but other industries here in Australia. And we're working on some education programs with government as we speak. We're rolling out some executive level as well as high school level education programs here in South Australia. And the core theme is that we need to expand this paradigm of cyber and digital out into all of the impacts of living increasingly digitally mediated lives. A lot of those can be, unfortunately, quite negative. The impacts of a massively expanded profiling and scoring regime is the chief threat, if I were to boil it down for me, is that the promise of living in an open, democratic, ostensibly fair and accountable society is that from whatever base you're starting from, if you work hard and you've got talent, then you can move up. So there's that promise of social mobility, social and economic mobility, that's really at the heart of a social contract in an open, fair societies like ours. And the biggest fear, if I were to boil it down for me, is that in increasingly machine-oracled, machine-mediated, digitally mediated lives we're living, and in interacting with all of those important resource allocation infrastructures, is that there could be a real chilling effect on the capacity for social and economic mobility. And that would be to sort of undermine the promise of our society. So I think we've got to get the balance right to get all of the benefits of this amazing technology, all of this amazing data that can tell us an awful lot. But it can also be abused. And one of the things about technology is that it's a problem solver, but it's also a problem creator. And I think we have to get better at, as societies, understanding that from the outset and working that understanding into the way we approach and research and develop technology, but particularly when we scale it, particularly when it comes to scaling. That's when you introduce emergent effects and unpredictable effects, side effects and accidents of our otherwise good, well-intentioned interventions can be really pernicious. And it's difficult to pin down in an empirical sort of quantified way, but there's a lot of discourse out there in the scholarship that's suggesting that some of the things we've done with the expansion of profiling and scoring over the last 20 years or so can be linked in one way or another to some of the breakdowns in our society, which have a multiple number of causes, of course. And I'm not just going to blame social media and that sort of thing, but that expanded digital mediation of our lives is having really interesting social and political effects. And if that's having a pernicious effect on the social fabric of our democracy, then that's something that we as scientists and social scientists and people in industry and government, we have to get our heads around it, because as we speak now, there doesn't really exist a discrete scientific discipline that can actually tell me, that can actually show a researcher or an analyst what the implications are of not only a technology-based or a behavioural or cognitive intervention, but of scaling it. We don't really have a discrete scientific discipline to tell us that. So we need to develop that, and that's something that industry, government, practitioners, and also the everyday person in democracy needs to be involved in. So that's what I mean when I talk about the democratization of cyber and the democratization of this sort of technology. The screen you're looking at, that's just a bit of a summary of what I've more or less gone through. It's more in a defense and military context. A lot of our work has been funded in that paradigm, but we also see a very distinct, well, an indistinct blurring between civilian and military affairs, particularly when we're talking about information and dis, and malinformation and the problems arising there. So there's a merging of civilian and defence areas here it's distinctly problematic for democratic liberal societies who ostensibly try to separate those areas. Perhaps I'll move to my next slide. At JBC, we have actually conducted a really interesting bit of research. We employed a dozen research assistants who are sort of in the last year or two of their undergraduate course at Flinders. And we employed them to take this framework that you're looking at, the digital anthropological terrain, which is just basically a way of breaking cyberspace apart into 5 surfaces. We chose surfaces we think are the most pivotal to understanding the whole stack of digital technology in cyberspace. And we sent the RAs off to find out what corporate, financial, and political or regulatory agencies were operating across each surface. And we got it. We weren't sure how they were going to go. This was a real sort of bit of blue sky research, and it was a new sort of pedagogy as well for the way universities work. We were able to pay the RAs 30 hours each to go and do this work, and we wanted them to not only to find out some data about those influences across the stack, but we also wanted them to really jot down their methodology. So essentially we wanted some answers, but we also wanted them to develop a questioning device. So we see the DAT, as we call it, as a framework for generating interesting questions around situational awareness in the digital anthropological terrain, again, from a military or a defense perspective, but very much relevant across civilian domains as well, in terms of really just getting down into the nitty-gritty of what's occurring across the digital stack. We don't have a good enough awareness of that. We don't really have a framework for it because, as I said before, typical cybersecurity paradigms are very much focused on that technology end, and they don't bring in the massive influence that corporations and financial actors, as well as a really patchy sort of landscape of regulatory intervention, is having on cyberspace and the digital domain. So that was a really fantastic bit of work we did at JBC. That's the DAT was going to be published shortly in the Cyber Defense Review, if any of you are familiar with that publication, in the summer edition. Some of the conceptual framing behind that will be published in that publication. And we've also turned we're further developing the DAT with a defence client in Australia to essentially develop a code book around how analysts ought to think about the data that they think they're looking for. Because again, data often provides a set of answers that are incomplete. So we think it's really, really important to be able to interrogate your own assumptions about the data you're looking for in this data-driven age, and to be able to generate questions about those assumptions that could in fact reveal or identify certain vulnerabilities, particularly again in a defence and military sense. The military is flooded with data, it's flooded with information. They're using statistical inference software, otherwise known as AI, to deal with that flood of information, and that means a lot of information gets lost, and a lot of understanding starts to atrophy. We really worry about the cognitive effects of all of this machine-generated learning. So the DAT is an attempt to sort of grab some space back in that domain. And the byline for it was reclaiming information for the warfighter, because the warfighters had information sort of taken away from them, and it's become something that you look to machines and machine oracles to make sense of. We think there's a really important role for human cognition in all forms of human information processing and analysis, and we are seeking really to foreground the human cognitive part rather than to sort of push it to the side, because it's slower and it's full of bugs and it's full of biases, which is all true, but it's also an incredibly important way of framing the world for human beings. And when it comes down to in a military domain, we've argued that one of the ways you grab back information, you claw it back, and you claw back some agency in that space, rather than just offloading more cognitive tasks to machine learning and machine processing, we think actually the idea is to actually push values. Militaries are obviously really value-laden institutions. They really push their values forward and push them really hard. And the US military, certainly that's true of them. And we think that's a strength. And we think that's actually a heuristic that can be used to grab back some understanding of the human role in this data deluge age. And we can actually bring back we can grab a little bit of ground back from the gale of data and information that's coming at us, not so much by offloading cognitive tasks to machines, but actually by bringing them back to our community and our institutions and our values. So that brings me perhaps to the next slide. We're getting closer to the SIMBA trial. Largely what I've said about the analysis and the tool is on that screen in front of you. The big problem for us is largely, as I said, information as an environmental condition. What are the conditions that really have to exist and have to be healthy for democracy to be healthy? So we're looking at a level below sort of these discourses around truth and post-truth, and we're really looking at the conditions in which democracies can thrive, and what are the informational structures and conditions that have to exist in order for democracy to be resilient, and for those things to be strengthening rather than corroding and weakening. So in tackling the mis, dis, and malinformation problem we all are probably fairly well aware of, that's largely been generated by the internet and by recommendation machines. This brings us to the case study here that JBC and SIMBA Chain and the Australian government entered into. Just a quick wrap up from me about that. As David mentioned, so this was more than a year ago now. The Australian government was concerned about an upcoming public information release that they were planning. This was all obviously open, non-secret information that was going to be released to the public. They were really concerned about the emergence of inauthentic simulation, deep fakes, and that sort of thing, and the capacity for the simulation of that information they were planning to release to be distorted or to be manipulated by whoever, and to be sent back really at the Australian government, to be aimed back at them as an information operation designed to destroy trust and trustworthiness of the Australian government, and to, you know, to do some reputational damage. There's all kinds of things that dis and malinformation can be aimed at from a political point of view. And we are very much talking now about international relations. The government was interested in, and my colleague in defence came to me interested in, well, what are the big technology themes out there that are tackling the deep fake problem and the inauthentic simulation problem? And I knew of a few of them. I know In-Q-Tel's got a fake finder project. I know DARPA's got some interesting projects going on, but we knew that there wasn't going to be a silver technology bullet to come down the track, and this was a fairly urgent task we were looking at. So we knew that we weren't going to just nab the deep fake problem in the bud. We needed to actually focus on what are the actual effects that inauthentic simulation are generating, and how can we actually protect them? So we're talking about trust, and we're talking about really something quite simple, that the information consumer can be confident that the information producer, that the information they're consuming is the authentic artifact that came from the information producer. It's a very simple thing. Like, if we're getting to a stage where information consumers can't be certain about the authenticity and have no way to verify, at least in a efficient way, have no way to verify the authenticity of the information they're consuming, then we really are starting to shake up that information as an environmental condition problem. We're really turning the information environment into something that's largely unusable, to put it in those terms, for whether it be government organisations, or this will come down to businesses at a community level, and even for individuals, that if we can't verify the authenticity of the information artifact we're consuming, then that really shakes the tree in terms of trust and institutions in our society. And right at the core of democracy is a concept of trust, that we have to, at a minimum, be able to trust the important information that something like a government or a business is pushing out there. Consumers of that information, not only as consumers, but as citizens, have to be able to trust that. Otherwise, we're in a pretty scary place when it comes to the foundation of our democracy. So I was already in contact with SIMBA, as David mentioned, discussing some other things around education. I'd been actually following SIMBA since 2017, when I knew they got the DARPA grant to develop the secure messaging on the blockchain application. And so I was very interested in them. So I reached out through the usual channels, and we generated this discussion around the problem that the Australian government was facing. And we, as I said, we sort of sidestepped we're not fixing misinformation here. That's not the idea. We're not going after the misinformation artifact. What we're going after is the effect that that's having on trust between entities that need to be able to trust one another at a fairly basic level. So we came to this discussion about authenticity verification. We knew that blockchain was an ideal sort of technology to achieve that. We got it with the small group of technology developers together. We had a really, really great interaction, a really great, over a number of months, discussion about how to tackle this. And my defence colleagues were involved, other research colleagues as well, and all the team at SIMBA were just fantastic jumping on board this problem. We all just sort of hit it together, and we developed this application whereby, as David mentioned, any organisation, but in this instance, particularly government, can have any of its public information it's set to release, so whether it's text or images or video or audio, can be uploaded into the blockchain. It gets a unique digital signature in that process. And then at the other end of the application is the consumer, who has a smartphone app. The information they're consuming can then be checked against the record in a very, very efficient and pretty cool and innovative way, and they get a register on that red, amber, green register in terms of the authenticity of the information. We use some really interesting technology workarounds to fix the problem. The fact that when you hash a digital file that's moving across the internet, a little bit of code jumps on while it's moving around. So if you hash it at the file level, you're going to get an inauthentic register if you check that file. So the technology team found some really interesting workarounds for that. So we don't hash it at the file level, we hash it at the content level, and that gave us the ability to generate the rainbow register for the level of misinformation. And as David said, and as you see on the screen in front of you, the next step really is to implement what we could call a trust officer, or what we've called here a strategic engagement specialist. This really is about generating a new role for human beings tasked with implementing and integrating a technology solution, but very much in the context of understanding how that technology solution integrates into an organizational environment, but also an organizational culture, and very much so keeping human judgment in the loop, because it's going to come down to, okay, so I get an amber register for a certain piece of information. This might be an urgent thing to address with, if I'm a diplomat, with my foreign counterparts, or it might not be. So how do we then, what's the next step after using the SIMBA app? So that's very much a role for a strategic engagement specialist or a trust officer. But the real innovation that the SIMBA app delivers is that speed. Ultimately, when I explain what the innovation is here, it's really speed in terms of the verification process. As my defence colleague always reminded us, that mis, dis and malinformation moves at the speed of the internet, and that's just below the speed of light. A really problematic information contagion could cause huge problems between societies that otherwise have good relationships, just on the basis of some form of deep fake or inauthentic simulation that's occurred on some public information from a trusted actor like a foreign government or a domestic government. So how do we speed up the verification? It's because diplomacy occurs at the speed of days, weeks and months, and that can be long enough for a really problematic information contagion to cause problems in a relationship and actually undermine trust between governments and between societies, and I'm sure between consumers and businesses. So I think this application has immense potential. As David mentioned, there's been some really promising uptake by various actors in the US military. The Australian trial is still in front of government for assessment. So we produced the assessment piece of the trial late last year. Government moves pretty slowly and they're awfully busy, but we very much look forward to some feedback on that trial and looking towards. The trial got a lot of high-level support within the government and particularly within defence. There was a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about it as an information solution, not only potentially for defence, but for a whole of government information standard. So I think, as I said, I think the app's a real sleeping giant, not only in a public institutions role, but also private role. Businesses could use this. Imagine governments, universities, businesses who actually take it on themselves to push towards the consumer of the information that they are producing, an application that gives that consumer some confidence back. Because I worry that as we lose confidence in the authenticity of the information we're consuming, it's really going to start to erode, perhaps more quickly than we understand, the essential fabric the social fabric of our democracy. So why not push forward an application, push forward a solution, and actually impose some self-discipline on ourselves and use the technology to help us to do that, to give each other and the consumers of our information, of our important information when it comes to government and business, the confidence that and the ability to, in a participatory role, of just checking the authenticity. Wouldn't that be a fantastic thing to sort of roll out And if we want to talk about the effects of scaling information, I think that could be an incredibly positive, have an incredibly positive impact if we were to scale that across our democracies. But we wait and see. We wait and see how the market picks these things up. But I'm very serendipitous about this application. And it was just, as I said, just in closing, perhaps, it's been a fantastic collaboration with SIMBA and the government and my academic role. I think it's a case study to take forward. Our students have really enjoyed learning about it as well. And it's a story we continue to tell. This is actually the first time that I've told that story in public. So it's a story we'll continue to tell publicly, and hopefully we get some more buy-in from government and industry as well. Anjan and David, I think that's about it from me.
That is fabulous. Thank you very much, Zach. We have a lot of questions or several questions that have come up, so we'll get to those. But before we do, we'd like to finish things off with a little bit of more information about SIMBA Chain. And David, would you like to talk a little bit about what we do on the education side here?
Right, absolutely, sure. I'll get to that quickly so we can get to the question. So yeah, SIMBA provides easy to understand tools for basically, we offer a web app called SIMBA Quick Start for use in the classroom for you to educate your students. It's being used from all different levels of students, from high school all the way through higher education and graduate programs. And then in the research and the more complex, problems that you're trying to solve in a research setting, we offer the SIMBA Enterprise solution, and that's available as well. But we provide training. We like to train the trainer so that your team understands it as well as we do. We provide education services if that's something you're interested in. And of course, we provide development services. So with that, Anjan, I'll pass it back to you.
Great. And please do keep the questions coming here. You can email us directly if we don't get your question today, or if you think of something a little later. But a couple of things that have come up here, and I'm going to, by the way, I'm going to start off, we have one question is, a little bit more kind of bigger picture, does blockchain risk to become the sole truth authority that might exclude and punish alternative thinkers? Well, I'm going to take a first shot answer to that, and moderator's privilege here, and say that, that's a risk no matter what, but blockchain actually gives you certain tools and safeguards so that certainly more safeguards than centralized mechanisms would otherwise provide. It's still a risk, and certainly there are blockchain implementations, or at least parts of the core technology that you could use for it to, become, for instance, a surveillance mechanism. But again, there are points of opportunity and mechanisms so that it's actually harder to do that than it would be in centralized systems. So that's what I would argue. But I'll also hand that off to Zach. Would you like to take a shot at that? And you're, thinking more broadly from a social sciences standpoint, your research, the risk of it becoming something like kind of monothinking or surveillance. I would argue that centralized systems actually are more risky for that, not blockchain. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, Anjan, and it's a question that I've sort of considered myself, and I don't consider myself an expert on the blockchain technology, so I won't sort of comment there. But I do, and I think Anjan's right, that there are mechanisms and there are opportunities within the blockchain technology, and particularly in the blockchain community, in that sense of a decentralized, very much the emphasis on decentralization. There must be a way to express, if blockchain is going to become a core resource allocation infrastructure, as I put it, there must be a way to be able to express pluralism, a sort of plurality of worldviews, of ways of being, of forms of life, even in socio and economic terms, as well as political terms. Blockchain can express all of that plurality if we set it up right. Yeah. If we allow, as we often do, it to become monopolized, which we did with the internet. If we allow that to happen, then I think that risk of a centralized truth agent is really pertinent. But if we do this right, and if we approach this correctly as we scale this information out, this technology out there, if we can all wrap our heads around how to make sure we give as full as possible an expression to a plurality of ways of life and ways of being, ways of thinking, then blockchain can really be a multiplier for the sort of societies we want to live in, rather than being, dragging us back, as Anjon mentioned, into a surveillance society. So we're really at a bit of a crossroads here, where we can take the technology any number of ways. It's just up to, again, academia, industry, and government to get those regulatory settings right, and to get the affordances that we build into the technology now right, so that we get the outcomes for our democracies that we want. But it can all go wrong. We've seen it before, and it can happen again. We just have to be in front of these things. And that's, somewhere like SIMBA is so open about how the technology is going to work. I think it's the ideal place to start.
Yeah, and I'd say, yeah, you mentioned the word pluralism. Pluralism is, and we mentioned earlier about, collaboration, shared governance, which are really kind of, synonyms of pluralism, or at least adjacent to it. They are both inputs to blockchain as well as outputs. I mean, if you go into this, with pluralism in mind, you will get pluralism out of it, and so that's a good thing. That's all the more reason why social science researchers should be involved with blockchain, both in what they can get out of it, but also to what they can contribute to it. And those two relate to each other. And I think it's an example of that. David, is there anything you'd like to add to that, or should we go on to the next question?
I think go on to the next question, Anjan.
Sure. And there's several of them. Someone asked, what does JBC stand for? That's the Jeff Bleich Center. I think that was answered online. IW, does that stand for information war? I believe it does, but someone did ask that, just a clarifying question there. Yeah. And fabulous. Now, someone asked, and this may be a David question or either of you, Ole asked, can we come to concrete examples of blockchain technology for education? Well, I think as far as education research goes, Jeff, David and Zach just presented it, but are there other examples that we can think of concrete examples of blockchain technology in education? I think student records that are owned by the students and learning records is a very kind of obvious example that you're seeing some experimental cases in, like, the education industry writ large. But David or Zach, would you like to add anything as far as blockchain tech and education?
I think as blockchain for an education use case, yeah, I think Anjan, you kind of nailed it. It's also to make it easier to access transcripts and maybe make that portable for the student to take with them and be able to share parts of their transcript with whom they desire to, and that's all secured and tamper-proof, so it can't be falsified. And yeah, I think the certificates, verifiable credentials is another aspect, and we offer a platform where that you can actually verify credentials online on a blockchain network. So yeah, there's many use cases for education. That would be almost like a separate topic.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Question for Zach. What does SMA stand for again? I don't see it specified in the current graphic. Those asked a little while ago. Go back over.
Sorry, guys. Yeah. Strategic multi-layer assessment. We borrowed that from the US institution.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. Well, this is going to be a little bit of a tricky one, but we're going to go for it. We're going to take it anyway. So, what happens if once considered truth, information later is being discovered, needs to be updated, but the original source is secured and cannot be changed? David or Zach? Do you want to take a shot at that?
Zach.
Well, I would sort of direct you to, discussions about truth are incredibly thorny, and we could have several webinars about that. But the way I've approached it, and the way I approach it in my research, is to really focus on, rather than focusing on the artifacts of truth, is to focus on the conditions that have to exist for something like truth to exist. So I could sort of simplify truth to the capacity to generate and sustain shared histories. And if I take that as a chief environmental condition that has to exist for truth to exist, the capacity to sustain and generate shared histories, then the need to change, the fact that truth changes over time is not as problematic as that perhaps Platonic sense in which truth is this universal, unchanging thing. I think we actually have to move away from Plato. It's really interesting that Anjon used Plato up front. In my other research, I really am interested in philosophy and epistemology. The idea that truth is a changing thing rather than some set universal thing is a really important challenge to the way we do things as Western democracies. Digital technology just tends to be pulling that out of us a bit more and confronting us with it. So blockchain is a record of authenticity. Yeah. It doesn't have to be thought of as a record of truth. I might sort of offer that as a way of thinking about it. Yeah.
And I think that's a great answer. And you know what, I'm going to take moderator's privilege and which I'm doing quite a bit more on this session, and add to that and saying that, you know, at a very kind of concrete process, even technical level, what blockchain actually gives you with the audit trail is you can see how that information has changed. So for instance, if truth does change, or consensus changes, or more, you know, as they say, I think it was a famous saying by the economist Keynes, like when the information and the data changes, my opinion changes. What do you do, sir? So that was kind of a very famous quote he gave. So as information comes in, you can actually track that and then go back and see this is how the knowledge grew, because more information came in and you can see the audit trail. So that's kind of the value of the append-only audit log, because you can see the trail of how something has changed. So in that sense, you get a version of not just your current truth, but how it evolved to where you currently stand. So that's what I'll say on that. A couple of this one, I'm going to give this is going to be a tricky one for you, Jeff, but I'm going to put it out there anyways, because I think it's an important question to ask this. You know, have you received feedback from Aboriginal communities? So I'm going to assume in Australia, Aboriginal communities or groups working to challenge digital surveillance on the work that you're doing. And if you haven't received feedback, do you have any? I'm going to add, like, do you have any thoughts on that? Because it is, you know, certainly I'm going to guess a sensitive issue in Australia, and given the age that we're in, I think it's important to address you know, sensitive topics. So that is from Shani.
I think it's a fantastic question, Anjan, and thank you for asking it. JBC's only been around for about 2 years, so we haven't had a chance yet to develop all of the avenues that we want to. But from my point of view, engaging with Indigenous communities in Australia, and indeed the broader picture here is that as the digital age unfolds, as AI and blockchain and everything becomes very much part of the digital ecosystem all of us are interacting with, it's those communities that are left behind, and those people who are left out of the promise of the openness and the fairness of our society that are really our primary targets here. We really want to help educate people and bring them forward, as at the same time we're discussing some of all the positives and negatives about this technology. So my answer is that we haven't had that engagement yet, but we absolutely intend to, and I think it's one of the most important parts of what we do. But I'll also add that I've had a little bit to do with Indigenous communities over my career, and I find interacting with people from such diverse backgrounds is incredibly informing of the way I think about not only technology, but technology in the world and the role it plays in society. So there's a huge amount of mutual learning that can go on between a centre like ours and the Indigenous community in Australia. Yeah, I couldn't endorse that more.
Yeah, well, you know, that we're at the hour here, and there are so many questions that have come up. Thank you so much. We will try to address those by email. You can certainly, you know, email us if you're dying for an answer. There's questions on power consumption I see in Bitcoin mining. I will just come out and say that that's something that the sector needs to address, and progress is being made. There are protocols outside of Bitcoin that use quite a bit less energy. I'm proud to say that we work with, we support some of those, and we'll continue to support more of them. But that is definitely an important topic for the sector to address. So, you know, with all that, we're going to have to wrap things up. This was an amazing call. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much to the Chronicle. Thank you, Zach. You know, we hope our audience found this session to be helpful. Keep an eye out for future SIMBA Chain webinars this fall. We've got some great ones scheduled. As a reminder, we'll be sharing the recording and slides with you all tomorrow. So please feel free to, again, reach out to any of us if you got questions, feedback, suggestions for future topics, and enjoy the rest of your day. And Zach, I hope you're in Australia. I hope you are able to get some sleep. So
thanks, Andrew. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.